Dad, perfect events. Beverly's family locked my son in the freezing shed during a blizzard. They said it was just a joke. When I found him barely breathing, hypothermic, they laughed and told me to stop being dramatic. They drove away in their fancy SUV while I waited for the ambulance, but they didn't know about my brother Leonard. As the paramedics loaded Theodore into the ambulance, I made one phone call, just one. They're heading back to Toronto now. I said quietly, do what you do best. My name is Victor, I'm 67 years old, and I spent 35 years teaching high school history in Thunder Bay before I retired. Let me tell you how this whole thing started. The Whitfield place up in Muskoka smelled like pine and wood smoke that December evening. To everyone else, it probably seemed like the perfect winter getaway. But I've learned to read situations differently over my years. Under that nice fireplace smell, I caught something else, something that didn't sit right with me. I was sitting in this old rocking chair on the porch, watching through the frosty windows as my son Theodore helped his wife Beverly's family unload groceries from their cars. 3 black Range Rovers lined up in the snow-covered driveway like they were showing off. The Whitfields never did anything small. My son was moving fast, trying to please everyone, carrying twice as many bags as anyone else. His laugh was too loud, too forced, whenever his father-in-law made one of those cutting remarks. I knew that laugh. It was the same one I used to hear from his mother when she was trying to keep the peace at family get-togethers. Theodore got that gentle nature from her that need to make everyone happy. Broke my heart to watch him try so hard. The Whitfield cottage wasn't really a cottage. It was this massive glass and cedar house sitting on its own peninsula that stuck out into Lake Muskoka. Roger Whitfield had made his money in commercial real estate, and he made sure everyone knew it. The place had 7 bedrooms, a home theater, and a wine cellar. Even the boathouse was bigger than the home I'd raised Theodore in back in Thunder Bay. I only came to these things for my son. Every holiday he'd call me with that hopeful voice. Dad, please come. Beverly's family really wants to get to know you better. It would mean so much to me. What he really meant was he needed someone in his corner, someone who saw what was happening behind all those polite smiles and expensive wine. Roger Whitfield was holding court in the great room when I went inside. He was a big guy, not tall but wide, with the kind of presence that sucked up all the air in a room. His son Stanley stood next to him like some kind of bodyguard. They had the same cold eyes, the same way of looking at people like they were calculating how much money you were worth. Victor. Roger's voice boomed across the room. Come join us for a drink. We're having the good scotch tonight. I walked over slow. My bad knee always acted up in cold weather. Thank you, Roger. Don't mind if I do. Teddy boy here was just telling us about his little promotion, Roger said, swirling that amber liquid in his crystal glass. Assistant manager at the hardware store. Isn't that something? The way he said it made it sound pathetic. My son had worked at Whitfield's Hardware for 8 years, had turned the Thunder Bay location into their best performing store. But to Roger, he'd always be Teddy Boy, the working guy who somehow convinced Beverly to marry him. Theodore's done great work, I said, keeping my voice steady. That store's profits have doubled since he took over. Roger waved his hand like he was brushing away a fly. Numbers on a spreadsheet. Anyone can move numbers around. Real business is about vision, about taking risks. He looked at Theodore like he felt sorry for him. Maybe someday you'll understand that, Teddy. My son just nodded and smiled, but I saw his jaw get tight. I saw the way his hand shook a little when he lifted his drink. Beverly came over and slipped her arm through Theodore's for a second. I thought she might stick up for him. Instead, she said, Daddy's right, honey. You should think bigger. Maybe Stanley could mentor you. Stanley smirked. He was 34, same as Theodore. But that's where it ended. Theodore had earned everything through hard work. Stanley had coasted through life on his father's money, never held a real job, never faced a real challenge. His biggest accomplishment was marrying a woman whose family had even more money than his. Sure, Stanley said. I could teach you a few things about how business really works if you can keep up. The laughter that followed was sharp and mean. I wasn't part of it, and neither was Theodore. That night, after everyone went to bed, I found my son sitting alone on the back deck, wrapped in a heavy coat, staring out at the frozen lake. The temperature had dropped to -20, and I could see his breath in the moonlight. You should come inside, I said, sitting down next to him. You'll freeze out here. Theodore didn't move. Remember when I was a kid and we used to go ice fishing on Lake Nipigon? Sure. You hated putting the worms on the hook. He laughed, but there was no joy in it. Those were good times, simple times. Theodore, I put my hand on his arm. You don't have to stay with these people. You don't owe them anything. She's my wife, Dad. And you're my son. I see how they treat you. It's not right. He turned to look at me, and in the moonlight, I saw tears in his eyes. She wasn't always like this. When we first met at university, she was different. She was kind. She believed in me. People change when money gets involved. She's pregnant, Dad. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat back in my chair, couldn't say anything for a minute. 3 months along, Theodore said. We were going to announce it tomorrow at the family dinner. I thought maybe this would change things. Maybe having a grandchild would make Roger see me differently. I wanted to tell him that Roger Whitfield would never see him as anything but a problem, that the baby would just become another weapon in their games, but I couldn't. Not with that hope still in my son's eyes. Congratulations, I said instead. I'm going to be a grandfather. He smiled, and for just a second he looked like the boy I remembered. The one who used to believe that working hard and being decent would always pay off. The next morning brought trouble. I woke up early, like always, and went to the kitchen to start the coffee. Through the window, I could see the sky had turned this ugly gray color. Weather reports had been warning about a storm coming in, but Roger had brushed it off. We have generators, he'd said, and enough supplies for a month. What's a little snow? I found Theodore in the kitchen ahead of me, looking at his phone with a worried face. Environment Canada just put out a severe blizzard warning, he said. They're saying we could get over 60 centimeters by tonight. Winds up to 90 kilometers an hour. We should head back to the city. I told him that. Roger says we're staying, says only cowards run from weather. Of course he did. Guys like Roger Whitfield don't back down from anything. They plant their feet and let other people deal with whatever happens. By noon, the first flakes started falling. By 300, you couldn't see the lake anymore. The wind was howling around the house like something alive and hungry. The Whitfields didn't seem bothered. They sat in the great room drinking wine and playing cards while the storm went crazy outside. Roger had started making jokes about Theodore being worried. City boy scared of a little snow, he said. Maybe he should go wait in the shed until it's safe. Stanley laughed. That's not a bad idea. Beald's character? Stop it, I said. That's enough. Roger's eyes went narrow. Excuse me, Victor. Did you say something? I said, that's enough. Leave the boy alone. The room went dead quiet. I could feel everyone staring at me. Roger put down his glass and stood up slow. I don't think I asked for your opinion, he said. You're a guest in my home. You'd better remember that. And Theodore's your son-in-law. He's family. You'd better remember that. We stared at each other across the room. Roger was used to scaring people with his money and connections, but I'd spent 35 years teaching high school history in Thunder Bay. I'd dealt with plenty of bullies in my time. Finally, Roger smiled. It didn't touch his eyes. You're right, Victor. Family is important. In fact, why don't we have some family bonding time? Stanley, take Teddy out to the shed and show him where we keep the emergency generator. Make sure he knows how to run it just in case. Theodore stood up. I can do that. I'll come with you. I said, no need. Roger's voice was firm. Stanley will handle it. You and I can have a nice chat about family values. I didn't like it. Something felt wrong. But Theodore was already putting on his coat, following Stanley out the back door into that white hell outside. 20 minutes went by, then 30. Roger kept me busy with small talk, filling up my drink, asking about my retirement plans, but I kept looking at the door. They're taking too long, I finally said. Relax. They're probably having fun out there, guy stuff. 45 minutes an hour. I stood up. I'm going to check on them. Sit down, Victor. I'm going to check on my son. I pushed through the back door and got hit by a wall of wind and snow. The cold was like a slap in the face, even through my heavy coat. I couldn't see 3 feet ahead, but I knew which way the shed was, and I started walking. It took me 10 minutes to find it. The shed was this big structure where they kept the backup generator, tools, and outdoor stuff. When I got to the door, I found it locked from the outside. A heavy padlock was hanging there, the kind that wasn't there yesterday. I pounded on the door. Theodore. Theodore, can you hear me? A weak voice came from inside, shaking. Dad? Dad, I'm in here. They locked me in. It's so cold. I pulled at that lock with everything I had, but it wouldn't move. The shed wasn't heated. In this weather, with temperatures way below -30 with the wind, hypothermia could kill you in an hour. Hold on, son. I'm getting you out. I fought my way back to the house, the wind trying to knock me down every step. When I burst through the door covered in snow, Roger and Stanley were sitting calm by the fire. Beverly was there too, with this blank look on her face. Where's the key? I demanded. Roger raised an eyebrow. Key to what? Don't mess with me. My son is locked in that shed. He's freezing. Give me the key. Stanley laughed. It's just a joke, old man. He'll be fine. A little cold builds character. He could die out there. Drama queen, Roger said. Just like his father. We'll let him out in a bit, let him cool off. Literally, I looked at Beverly. Your husband is in danger. Doesn't that mean anything to you? She wouldn't look at me. Daddy knows what he's doing. That's when I understood everything. This wasn't some spur of the moment thing. This was planned. They wanted to break my son to put him in his place. The pregnancy must have scared them somehow. Maybe they were afraid Theodore would stand up for himself as the father of their grandchild. Maybe they just couldn't stand the thought of someone they looked down on being part of their family forever. I pulled out my phone. No signal. The storm had knocked out the cell towers. The landline, I said. Where's the landline? Roger's smile got wider. Disconnected it yesterday. Didn't want any interruptions during our family time. I didn't waste any more words. I went to the garage, found a pair of bolt cutters, and fought my way back through the storm to the shed. When I finally got the door open, I found Theodore curled up in a corner, barely awake. His lips were blue. His breathing was slow and shallow. I pulled off my coat and wrapped it around him. Then I half-carried, half-dragged him back to the house. The Whitfields just watched as I laid him on the couch by the fire. Only when I pulled out my satellite phone, the one I always carry when I go to remote places, did Roger's face change. 911, I need an ambulance. Life-threatening hypothermia. The dispatcher told me it would be hard to get anyone through the storm, but they'd try. They told me to keep him warm, watch his breathing, look for signs of his heart acting up. I did everything they said. For 3 hours, I sat with my son while the people who'd tried to kill him watched from across the room. The ambulance finally made it at midnight. The paramedics had to use snowmobiles for the last kilometer. They worked on Theodore for 20 minutes before loading him onto a stretcher. He's going to make it, one of them told me. You found him just in time. Another hour and we'd be talking about something else entirely. As they carried him out, I heard Stanley mutter to his father. This is ridiculous. It was just a prank. I stopped. I turned around. I looked at Roger Whitfield, at that smug face, at the complete lack of regret in his eyes. Then I pulled out my phone and made a call. Leonard, I said quietly, walking away from the group. It's Victor. Silence on the other end. Then my brother's voice, rough from sleep. Vix, do you know what time it is? They tried to kill Theodore, the Whitfields. They locked him in a shed during a blizzard, left him to freeze. More silence. I could hear Leonard breathing, could almost hear his brain working. Where are they now? Heading back to Toronto once the road's clear. I understand. Do what you do best. I hung up and got in the ambulance with my son. I hadn't talked to my brother in 3 years. Not since he'd retired from his job as an insurance investigator under circumstances that were never fully explained. Leonard had spent 32 years investigating insurance fraud, working his way up to head one of the most effective financial crime units in Canadian law enforcement. He'd exposed crooked contractors, dirty lawyers, and fraudulent claims worth millions. But somewhere along the way, his methods became unconventional. The official story was that he'd burned out, took early retirement, moved to a cabin in rural Nova Scotia to fish and read books. The real story was different. Leonard had found evidence of a massive insurance fraud network that went all the way to the top levels of business and government. When he tried to expose it, he got shut down, forced out. They destroyed his career, his reputation, his marriage. But they couldn't destroy what he knew, and they couldn't destroy the network of contacts he'd built over 3 decades. My brother was a patient man. He'd been waiting for the right chance to use what he knew. I'd just given it to him. Theodore was admitted to the ICU at Huntsville Hospital. The doctor said it was severe hypothermia that had stressed his heart. He needed at least a week of monitoring, but he would live. I sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair next to his bed and watched him sleep. His face was pale, but his breathing had gotten steady. The monitors beeped their reassuring rhythm. When he finally woke up late the next afternoon, his first words were, "The baby. Is the baby okay?" I'd forgotten. In all the chaos, I'd completely forgotten about the pregnancy. Beverly should be checked. Theodore mumbled, "The stress. Please, Dad." I made the call. The nurse told me that everyone had left that morning as soon as the roads were cleared. They hadn't asked about Theodore. They hadn't left any message. I didn't tell my son that, not yet. Everything's fine. I said, "You just focus on getting better." He closed his eyes and I saw a tear roll down his cheek. The next 3 days went by slow. I barely left Theodore's side. On the 4th day, my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Vic, Leonard's voice was calm, controlled. "You should turn on the news." I found a TV in the waiting room and switched to CBC News Network. The anchor was in the middle of a breaking story. Developing news this hour. Toronto real estate magnate Roger Whitfield and his son Stanley Whitfield have been arrested in connection with allegations of fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. Sources say the investigation stems from financial irregularities in Whitfield Development Corporation dating back over 15 years. I sat down hard in one of those plastic chairs. Roger Whitfield built his real estate empire in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The anchor continued. but questions have long surrounded the source of his initial capital and his connections to several offshore investment funds. Tonight, those questions may finally have answers. The screen showed footage of Roger being led out of his Toronto mansion in handcuffs. His face was pure fury and disbelief. Behind him, Stanley was being walked to a separate car, looking like a scared kid. My phone buzzed, a text from Leonard. That's just the beginning. Call me when you can talk privately. I found a quiet corner of the hospital and called my brother. How did you do this so fast? I asked. Leonard laughed. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years. I didn't do anything, Vic. I just made a few phone calls. Reminded some people of information they'd rather keep buried. Pointed some journalists in the right direction. What did you find? Roger Whitfield didn't build his fortune through hard work and vision. He built it by washing money for some very nasty people. Eastern European crime syndicates mostly looking to move their cash into Canadian real estate. He's been doing it for 2 decades. Leonard paused, but protected people can become inconvenient when their secrets start coming out. When certain documents start circulating to certain journalists. When former investigators start asking questions. Another pause. I told you, Vic. I've been waiting a long time for the right chance. This wasn't about Theodore, was it? Not entirely. It was about Theodore. Your son gave me the excuse I needed. The Whitfield family crossed a line when they heard him. They made it personal, and personal is always the best motivation. Theodore was released from the hospital on the 7th day. I drove him back to Thunder Bay, to my small house on the edge of town. He didn't talk much during the trip, just stared out the window at the snow-covered landscape rolling by. When we pulled into my driveway, he finally said, I saw the news, Dad. I know, she never loved me. None of them did. I'm sorry, son. He turned to look at me. Did you do this? The investigation? The arrests? I thought carefully before answering. I made a phone call to Uncle Leonard. I told him what they did to you, and I told him to do what he does best. Theodore was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Good. The next few weeks were hard. Theodore barely ate, barely talked, but slowly he started to heal. The divorce was finalized in February. Theodore got full custody of the baby once it was born. Beverly didn't fight it. She was too busy trying to distance herself from her family's mess. Roger Whitfield was denied bail. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Stanley tried to flee the country but got arrested at the Vancouver airport trying to board a flight to Dubai. One afternoon in March, I was cleaning out my garage when I heard a car pull into the driveway. It was Theodore. He got out slowly, carefully. Beverly had given birth 2 weeks earlier, and Theodore had been in Toronto for the custody transfer. In his arms was a small bundle wrapped in a yellow blanket. Dad, he said, I'd like you to meet your granddaughter, Carol. I walked over and looked down at the tiny face. She had Theodore's eyes, kind eyes, gentle eyes. Hello, Carol, I said softly. Welcome to the family. 6 months later, I stood on the shore of Lake Nipigon, holding my granddaughter in my arms. Theodore was setting up our fishing equipment nearby. You know, Carol, I said softly, your father used to hate fishing when he was young. Couldn't stand putting worms on the hooks. I heard that, Theodore called. And for the record, I still don't like the worm part. I laughed. Some things never change. We fished until the sun went down, not catching much, not caring. Carol slept peacefully in her carrier, oblivious to the water, the trees, the quiet talk between her father and grandfather. This was my life now. Not the one I'd planned, not the one I'd expected, but a good life nonetheless. A life of small moments and quiet love. A life where the people who hurt my family had been brought to account. Where my son was healing. Where my granddaughter would grow up knowing she was loved. Justice isn't about getting even. It's about putting things back the way they should be. About reminding powerful people that they're not above consequences, no matter how much money they have or how many connections they think they've bought. The Whitfields thought they were untouchable. They thought a retired teacher from Thunder Bay and his investigator brother were beneath their notice. They thought they could lock a man in a freezing shed and laugh about it over expensive scotch. They were wrong. Roger Whitfield would spend the rest of his life in prison. The investigation had expanded beyond anything any of us had expected. His cooperation with Eastern European money launderers had opened up connections to organized crime, corruption in provincial government, and financial fraud across multiple countries. The investigation was now being handled by joint Canadian-American task forces. Stanley would be eligible for parole in 15 years. The family's assets had been seized, their name destroyed. Vanessa had tried to reach out to Theodore once a few months after the divorce. She wanted to discuss co-parenting arrangements. Theodore had declined. The custody agreement was clear, and he had no interest in exposing Carol to someone who had stood by while her father nearly froze to death. On the drive home from Lake Nipigon, Theodore asked, "Have you talked to Uncle Leonard lately? Last week. He's doing well. Says the fishing in Nova Scotia isn't as good as Lake Nipigon, but he's managing." Is he ever going to come visit? Maybe when things settle down completely. There are still a lot of trials pending. We drove in silence for a while. Carol stirred in her car seat, making small sounds. I think I understand now, Theodore said. Why you always told me that character matters more than success. Why you never let me take shortcuts even when other kids' parents did. Your mother and I wanted you to be a good man. Not necessarily a successful man, just a good one. I hope I can do the same for Carol, you will. I've never doubted that, and that's the story of how I made one phone call that brought down an empire. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted my son to know that his father would always protect him. Always. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against bullies isn't anger or violence, it's patience, and the right phone call to someone who's been waiting for justice. Family isn't just about blood or marriage vows, it's about who shows up when you're locked in a freezing shed and who walks away laughing.